All right, you're on.
Great. Thank you, Zandy. Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon, and thanks for dialing in to our whole family approach building blocks session this afternoon. We're going to go over sort of a construct that we have for what folks need to consider when they're shifting their organization to a whole family or a two-gen approach. And we're going to share some resources that are out there that will help you navigate some of these building blocks. And then I'm very interested in hearing your reactions and your questions and your feedback to these building blocks, because this is the first time we have sort of unfurled all of the building blocks together in one place. So this is an exciting webinar for us today. We always kick off our webinars by focusing on the promise of community action. You're going to hear me talk today about purpose, and certainly our community action promise helps connect us all to our purpose and community action. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. And just a reminder that this webinar and all our webinar Wednesdays are really brought to you by the Learning Community Resource Center. The purpose of the Learning Community Resource Center is to analyze community action outcomes and identify effective, promising, and innovative practice models that help address the causes and conditions of poverty. And the Learning Community Resource Center is designed to build CAA capacity to fight poverty, to increase impact, to expand outcomes. And we hope that if this is your first time dialing into Webinar Wednesday, that you look and join us more in the future, because these webinars are really jam-packed with the latest and greatest information folks need to be great community action professionals and to achieve impact. Also, all of the work that the Learning Community Resource Center does is to uplift and sort of strengthen some aspect of the national community action theory of change. Certainly today, when we talk about whole family approaches, outcomes that you can achieve through a whole family approach can fall in all three of the national goals that represent community action. So we definitely think that the building blocks that we're going to talk about today help individuals and families with low income be more stable and achieve economic security. We're going to talk about community voice and social capital, and those really all connect up to goal 3, which is people with low incomes are engaged and active in building opportunities in communities. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is not just changing things inside the community action agency, but helping the whole community shift to supporting parents and children together. And that certainly all links up with goal 2, communities where people with low incomes live, are healthy, and offer economic opportunity. If you go down deeper into the national theory of change and you look at some of the core principles, the principles about maximizing involvement of people with low income are really embedded in the first building block we're going to talk about today, which is engaging community and low-income people's voices. We're going to talk a lot about, blending and braiding funding. That's another building block, funding, and so that really connects up with the core principle for leveraging state, federal, and community resources. Advocating for systemic change is connected to the community work we're going to do. So when we think about whole family approaches, they certainly connect up in many ways to the National Community Action Network theory of change. And as we always try to do, a lot of the offerings and the work that the Learning Community Resource Center does is to strengthen different aspects of the theory of change work that all of you are doing. So we're sort of right in the sweet spot today, I think. A little reminder, maybe you're not familiar with the learning community, but we have the partnership has a number of different kinds of learning communities. We have some open learning community groups that folks can participate in. If you look on the Community Action Partnership website, you can see some really great webinars that have come from the Cultivating Data-Centered Organizations, results at the community level. And actually today, when I'm referencing resources for several of the building blocks, I'm going to call on some of the work of these open learning community groups. And then the partnership has what are called intensive learning community groups, which are populated by a certain cohort of agencies. These were all selected back in January. Community action agencies had to apply, and they have formed a cohort around integrating services to improve impact. Agencies that are interested in financial empowerment have a cohort. The Whole Family Approaches for Economic Mobility from Poverty learning community is focused on whole family approaches. And then we have a community of practice, which is even more of a little bit of an intensive community of 10 community action agencies who are a little further along in their work to shift to a whole family approach. And they are all of these intensive groups in the community of practice, their materials that they are developing, the webinars we've done for those groups are available on the partnership website. So even though you may not be a member of the intensive learning communities, you can benefit from the learning, and we're working really hard to disseminate information as it's developed for those groups. All of the learning community work is really based on the idea that, small actions and a lot of people can equal big change. And, we at this point have hundreds of people that are connected to the Learning Community Resource Center one way or another. And I can see for myself that many of them are really changing practices and deepening their work and achieving bigger change or greater impact. So it's really exciting, all the work and all the learning that's going on, and I'm really pleased to be a part of it along with the partnership. So this map just sort of shows that, we have learning community folks in all regions, 33 states and 407 counties. So you can see that, really in nearly anywhere that you may be, there's folks involved in the learning community work, and so it really is big. So here's the whole team for the Learning Community Resource Center, and I'm a consultant and a subject matter expert to the team, and just in awe of all the work that they get done. It's amazing when you start to look over the partnership website and see all the webinars and practice briefs that they're producing. It's pretty impressive, the amount of support that they're putting out for the Community Action Network. Gerald Crocker is the Director of Training and Technical Assistance. Tiffany Marley is a Project Director for the Learning Community Resource Center and leads a couple of the intensive groups. Hyacinth McKinley, who you heard from when we kicked off this webinar, leads the Financial Empowerment Learning Community, and Charity Frankowski, who was a VISTA worker, helps with rural impact and is now moving into a little bit different role at the partnership to support a variety of folks and efforts there. Eliza Porce is a program associate in training and technical assistance, and then Courtney Kohler is a senior associate for training and technical assistance. And Courtney leads several of the open groups and the service integration learning community groups. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about a whole family approach. Probably you've heard a little bit about whole family approach. It's very similar in concept to what you may have heard is called two-generation services. But what we're going to do today is really talk about building blocks for moving to a whole family approach, and resources that we've identified that community action agencies can start to review and delve into to prepare them to shifting to a whole family approach if that's what you're interested in. Or those of you who are already on the path may find that there's a particular area, maybe it's engaging family voice, that you need to beef up and you need to pay a little more attention to that. And so hopefully some of these resources will be useful for you. So those of you that maybe are a little bit newer to the conversation, I want to just take a minute to make sure that we're sort of all on the same page about what we mean by a whole family approach. Sometimes folks think, well, we have a Head Start in our community action agency, and we also serve parents in some employment programs, and so maybe we're doing 2-generation or we're doing whole family. But that's not exactly the case, and so we want to make sure that we're all on the same page here about what this approach really looks like. So when we talk about 2-gen or whole family approach, we're really talking about meeting the needs of children and parents together at the same time. And let's talk a little bit more about that. So Ascend at the Aspen Institute has a 2-generation playbook and a number of resources, and I'm going to reference some of those today. They really are a pioneer in the 2-generation space. So if you haven't looked at Ascend's website and looked at their materials or participated in some of those webinars and you're interested in this topic, I really encourage you to look at what they have to offer. But we're kind of using their framework, and they are a leader in this space, and this is a graphic from a lot of their work. And we know that there are a lot of child-focused programs out there, Head Start, other kinds of child care programs. There are a lot of parent-focused programs, employment training, housing. You may do some mentoring, some coaching with adults or parents in your programs. And when we bring those together and we offer both parent and child-focused services at the same time, that's what makes for a whole family or 2-gen approach. And generally, most community action agencies are somewhere on this continuum. Maybe you really are being very intentional already about serving your Head Start parents or your workforce parents in a very intentional way. And that's great, and hopefully some of our discussion today about building blocks will help you. If you're just sort of pondering what this might look like, then hopefully this framework will help you. Now, in addition to serving parents and children at the same time, there's some other elements and components that need to be present. So this theory of change actually lays out in a little bit more detail what 2-generation looks like. So we've established that it's parents and children together, but the other idea is that we're providing a comprehensive, coordinated set of services, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, about what those services might look like. But those comprehensive services are in the area of early childhood education for children, post-secondary workforce and training for parents, health and well-being for everybody in the family, economic assets, or that may involve financial literacy, financial coaching, credit cleanup, and then finally social capital. And bringing all those things together to the family in a holistic way. And we find that in many cases, community action agencies may be providing a couple of those elements, but to really cover all those, then we need to really partner with folks, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as we talk about the building blocks. I would also say sort of part of the theory of this and the concept is that when you intervene early in a child's life, when a family situation improves, the younger the child is when that improvement happens, the greater your chances of breaking the cycle of poverty and really ending intergenerational poverty. So these components and this idea that you're serving parents and children together are also really based on evidence and some of what we know really can make a difference in the long term. And so that's also really important in understanding the 2-gen or whole family approach. So what we have here is what we're calling the whole family approach building blocks, and we've really constructed these to be a little customized for community action agencies. We're going to pull from a lot of different resources. It's not that these concepts are just unique to community action, but when you think about where most community action agencies are, we think these are important building blocks. And I will also say that we've helped construct these from conversations and listening to community action agencies who are really far down the path with whole family approach or 2-gen, or community action agencies that are just starting. And we surveyed the agencies that are in the whole family community practice and the whole family learning community group about what they were concerned about. We've listened to agencies who are further down the road, and that's how we have constructed these building blocks. We've also talked to our colleagues and peers outside community action at Ascend, at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, at Kellogg, and a lot of different places that have been really focusing on 2-gen for a while, and we've brought in the best of their thinking to construct these building blocks. So I'm going to talk a little bit. This is really a survey. We're just here an hour together, and we're not going to go real deep into every one of these building blocks. But what we are going to do is sort of cover them all, give you some resources that you can drop into a particular building block and study and learn a little bit. And then over the course of the next several months, the partnership will, convene different webinars around some of these topics. And frankly, as you'll see when I go over the resources, some of these topics, they've gone very deeply into webinars already. For example, we're going to talk about some community collective impact work. There's a whole series of webinars going on that have really gone very deep into collective impact, and you can already access some of those on the partnership's website. So whole family approach building blocks. These are not, there's not necessarily an order to think about these. I have started with some things that I think are foundational, but depending on where you're at in your journey, some of these building blocks may be more important to you than others. What I would suggest to those of you that are out there on the call today and thinking about or in the process of shifting to a whole family approach is to take this webinar, and it'll be posted, and the slide deck will be posted, and we have a chart that lays out these webinars and resources. And if there's a particular area that you think your team back at your agency really needs to focus on in order to move down the path to a whole family, divide up the resources. Have every person in the team review a different resource and then do a couple brown bag lunches and come back and share the learning. There's a lot of material here. There's more material here than I'm even going to lay out today. And so you kind of need to get into learning mode, and that really needs to be, that's not just one person, but everybody on your team who's working on your whole family approach or who's convened to think about how your agency might shift to a whole family approach. So let's start to dive in here. And again, as Zandy mentioned, love for you, if you have questions, I'm going through these, to select the all chat or everyone in the chat and send a question or a thought or a reaction or suggestion about the building block that we're talking about, so that we can make this as relevant to your experience as possible. So the first building block is engaging family voices. And you'll see with each of these building blocks, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the components might be if you are thinking about it just from inside your community action agency, or if you're also in a position where you're ready and able to think about it from outside the community action agency too. So engaging family voices is really about collective problem solving, really approaching this work with empathy and respect for the families that we serve. And as I mentioned, that's a core principle of community action. We, from the very beginning, from the earliest days of the Economic Opportunity Act that established community action, we've had this, this real value about respecting people, treating people with dignity, and really involving them in the implementation and the planning of our programs. And some agencies have really maintained that and are very strong. And I would say that, in some other places, maybe that's gotten a little bit lost. So really going back and thinking about engaging, seeking to listen to our customers and our families, and not just listening to them, but engaging them in the design. We've been on this journey of a whole family approach with a set of agencies that were part of a rural impact initiative. And there were 10 agencies. Some were community action agencies, some were not. One of them in Maine, that's not a community action agency, but partners with their community action agency, did an incredible job before they even started implementing their programs of listening to customers, listening to young families in their area about what they needed in a whole family two-gen approach. And they ended up partnering and collaborating across a set of community groups and educational institutions. And they are now, I would say, a lot of the reason they're reaching some great success with increasing young parents' education is because they really design their services to meet the needs of the folks in their area. So this can be very powerful and really help you down the road to either avoid some pitfalls or know how to deal with some pitfalls when you've really engaged customers from the very beginning. And then if you think about engaging family voices outside the community action agency, you can really get connected to new families, to folks who maybe didn't even know about your services and who, aren't already connected. So that's sort of one of the benefits of connecting with families that are maybe not already in your program. And then really working with your collaborators or your partners in making sure that families are connected to anything that you're doing in collaboration or coordination with others. So I wanted to talk just a minute about a couple of tools that can really help you understand how you might amp up your customer voice. So the first is, actually I'm going to talk about creating solutions together, design thinking, the Office of Family Assistance and 3 grantees. So you'll have this, will be posted on the website, and you can access any of these links. This link here from the Office of Family Assistance really focuses on helping people understand human-centered design. And human-centered design is an approach to problem solving that really focuses on the empathy and what the end user needs. So in our case, our families. Our typical experience about solving problems is that we reason out a solution based on our prior experience, and we quickly get from a problem to a solution, or we quickly design what we think, based on our experience, our customers would need. But in human-centered design, which really listens to customer voices, We work together to consider possibilities. We involve the end user, the family, in the whole discussion, and it's really grounded in their needs. And so we often will find when we engage families at that level that there's things we didn't understand. There are needs or issues that we just did not have in our calculus, and so we would never got to the right solution because we didn't even have the problem identified properly. And then in human-centered design, our end users or families help to test what the solution is, perhaps determine how it might need to be tinkered with and improved to be the very best solution that we can find. So it's really about co-creating with our customers. And when I think about community action, I think about, we definitely have customers, representatives of the low-income community on our boards. But when we're really thinking about not just having their voice, but designing with them, we're taking that whole principle and that expectation to a different level. So that is the Human-Centered Design resource that's there to help you think about how you might improve in this particular building block. And then there's a great self-assessment from Annie Casey, who is a funder of some of this work that we're doing with community action agencies. They have a really deep planning tool that helps you assess where you're at in this space, and also helps, I think, to surface different strategies for how you can improve your customer engagement. So I direct you to those resources. We'll have more resources for you in this area as we move forward with this work. But if this is an area where you think you need to beef up a little bit, here's 2 good resources to get started. All right, building block number 2 is really important. Aligning high-quality, intentional, intensive services to parents and children. And those services, those components reflect the components that I outlined for you in the Aspen Ascend theory of change. We've added a couple here, executive functioning and parenting, that are very common to 2Gen efforts and to some of the work that community action agencies are doing. And so it's just not a matter of covering each of these components, but really providing quality, intentional, intensive services in each of these areas. And, you might think, well, we have a whole family or 2Gen approach, but if your early childhood and your post-secondary and these other components aren't high impact, aren't quality, aren't intensive, then you're not going to get to the results that we're trying to achieve with families, which is really breaking the cycle of intergenerational poverty or really moving people to a level of economic success that will end intergenerational poverty. So we've really got to pay attention to the quality and the impact of the services we're providing. Beyond the CAA, we want to think about engagement of partners to provide that full range of aligned services to parents and children. We know that in most cases, a community action agency is not going to be able to provide all those components. So it's really important to think about how you engage folks beyond the community action agency. So resources in this area, certainly looking at the 2-generation playbook that Aspen Ascend has out is really important. And then I really want to direct your attention to the second resource I have here, exploration of integrated approaches to support child development and improve family economic security. This is from the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation at the Administration for Children and Families at HHS. It's a report that they put out that really did a literature review and did some field work of existing 2Gen programs around the country. And they looked at, when you looked at those programs, what did you find? What did you determine? And the first item in their report is that quality and intensity may need to be at high levels for programs to have an impact on parent and child outcomes, and that intentional approaches to serving both generations may really matter on the outcomes. So this report really focuses on helping you to think about the importance of quality and intensity and intentionality. So I really direct you to that report. And then the second thing that they outline in that report is really a conceptual framework for how to think about whole family 2-gen that's based on all the field work and the literature review that they did. The report goes on to talk a little bit about collaboration and different levels of collaboration. So it's a really helpful report if you're sort of trying to think about are we providing the right kind of services and at the level of, that we need to. There's some other great resources that are mentioned here. Annie E. Casey has done a report on investing in innovation, reflections on the family's economic success, early childhood pilots. So for a number of years, Annie E. Casey has been funding some 2-gen whole family efforts, 4 of those that are referenced in the Family Economic Success Early Childhood Pilots. 2 of those are community action agencies. And what they do in this report is really talk about the learning to date from those 4 sites. Just to give you a little teaser, they talk about the importance of well-developed theories of change, the importance of listening to families in your design and implementation, the importance of changing systems and policies and not just changing inside the organization, and then really how do you developing the capacity to collect and integrate data. All those things are covered in our building blocks in one way, shape, or form. So I really encourage you to take a look at that report too. Ask somebody on your team maybe to review that report and give everybody a breakdown about how you think it speaks to you and your work where you're at. Got some other great resources there that you can look at, but for the sake of time, I'm going to keep moving, and we're going to move on to the next building block, which is building block 3, parent and child service integration. And you might be thinking, well, Jeannie, you just talked about the components, you know, the parent and child component. How is parent and child service integration different than what we, you know, might look at in our previous building blocks? And really, what we're sort of saying in this building block that we think is worth thinking about is not sort of the type of service you're delivering, whether it's early childhood or post-secondary, but how these services are delivered, and you know, more along the lines of you know, do you have folks pursuing post-secondary training, but the support you're giving to them is family-centered coaching, or have you co-located your parent and child services together so that they're more convenient for your families and more successful? So we're talking more here about some basic integration methods or tactics. And, you know, you can integrate parent and child services. You can do service integration for homeless families, for folks who are formerly incarcerated. Integration cuts across a lot of different populations. And so in this space, we're just sort of talking about what might we want to consider with service integration when we're serving parents and children together. It's really important to think about, you know, service integration is a component of whole family approaches, but you're not necessarily achieving a whole family approach just with having service integration, if that makes sense. So you've got some things here to think about. There's probably a number of others. This isn't an exhaustive list. You know, really approaching the work as family-centered coaching versus just case management. Providing coordinated family staff meetings, which really, you know, some folks might call these case conferences, where We convene as programs across the agency to talk about families that we're serving, parents and children that we're serving together. Perhaps you are thinking about in your whole family approach how to have more shared child and parent graduation events or training programs. Maybe parents come in to do their GED study in the evenings. Children come with, and there's some enhancement in the child component. That might be sort of also coordinated scheduling. Co-location, I think, is pretty common in some of this. And then sort of thinking about no wrong doors for parents. So maybe folks come in through Head Start or post-secondary or Section 8, but how do those services get integrated, and how do we make sure that folks have a whole family experience? So those are some of the concepts inside the Community Action Agency that we suggest folks think about. And then there's a whole nother level of integration outside, beyond the Community Action Agency, so integrating with other partners. Perhaps you may be like Allegheny County Community Action in Maryland, who co-located their Head Start Center on a community college campus. So they went beyond the Community Action Agency to integrate parent and child services. So there's a whole nother set of things to think about there. Resources in this area. Earlier on in the year, we did a webinar called Laying the Groundwork for Service Integration and a Whole Family Approach. And in that, we talk about the difference between service integration and whole family approaches, and how whole family approach includes some service integration concepts. There are several different frameworks and foundational resources in that webinar itself that you can look at for service integration and whole family. We've also the partnership has put out some practice series briefs. A previous learning community looked at bundled services, and there's a practice brief and case study on some community action agencies that were deeply pursuing bundled services. So you can look over that, practice brief. Related to coaching, a great resource is the Family-Centered Coaching Toolkit from Prosperity Agenda. The Kellogg Foundation helped create this toolkit to train folks on family-centered coaching, and a lot of community action agencies are looking at this, using this, getting training from Prosperity Agenda in this area, and then some other resources on service integration. So resources, lots of resources available on service integration. As I mentioned earlier, we have a learning community on service integration, and they've had a number of good webinars, and you can go back and look at the recordings of those. The fourth building block is understanding systems and policy change that supports parents and children. And this is always, a more challenging area, I think, for all of us, whether we're at the local, state, or national area. And we're sort of thinking more about this, and we'll provide more resources in the future on this. But we want you to think about, if you're sort of in this space, how you may not just be serving a few families differently, but how you really change the systems and the policies in your agency to provide a more whole family approach or two-gen experience. So, some examples that we've seen of things that agencies do out there is that maybe they create more of an agency-wide approach to coaching, and families that are in Section 8 or Head Start or in a different program are offered an opportunity to have a more intensive coaching experience. And those families are getting adult services and child services at the same time. So that is that's a system inside the organization that's changed. Maybe Head Start families are given some type of priority points to move up on the Section 8 list or on a jobs program so that we can provide intensive services, parent services to families that are already in Head Start. So in those ways, the agency is changing policy or changing systems, and so it's good to think about those possibilities. Again, we can think about this the same way outside or sort of beyond the Community Action Agency in how we might get partners and a network of folks in the community to change their systems or change their policies. That could even expand to, advocating to address the cliff effect for families and, different areas like that. So there's a lot that can happen in this space. We're still working. This is an area we're still working on, identifying some good resources for you. But one thing to look at to maybe broaden your perspective on what might be possible at a state or a systems level is Ascend's report, Making Tomorrow Better, a Guide to Outcomes for Two-Gen Policymakers. And they reference several different policy and systems changes that have been made at a state level in Colorado and Utah and other states around the country. So that might be of interest to some of you. Okay, building block number 5 is designing and implementing with an equity lens. And we've got a number of resources in this area, but first let's just sort of start with talking about this concept. So there's a lot of connection here with the first building block, engaging customer voice. If we engage customer voice, we're probably doing a better job of designing with an equity lens if we're making sure that our customers that we're engaging with are diverse and represent a lot of different backgrounds and opinions. Some of the ideas that we want folks to think about that have been raised as important in this space are recognize institutional, systemic, and structural barriers that perpetuate inequity. So sort of understanding those, being aware of those, and thinking about those when we design our whole family approach is really important. And here I go back to co-creation and co-ownership of solutions, which we talked a little bit about in customer voice. Exploration of environmental changes that promote family success. So what kinds of systems and policies might we need to change so that our families can succeed, either in the agency or in our community? Having staff reflect the diversity of the communities being served is certainly important and part of this building block. And then seeking to design and deliver strategies that bridge and build knowing, relationships, and mitigate structural bias problems. I'm going to talk a little bit about some resources that we have to perhaps help you with that. On the community level or beyond the community action, we want to recognize conscious and unconscious othering in our communities. So how are we making, how are folks feeling like they don't belong, and perhaps what can we do about that? Changing policies and processes that serve as barriers to families due to differences, and seeking to deliver strategies that bridge and build knowing. So we've got a lot of resources for you in this space. And the first one I wanted to talk about was this We the People, Practicing Belonging in a Period of Deep Anxiety. This comes from the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society. This is a PowerPoint presentation, and those of you that have been at the CAP conference or maybe in other conferences may have seen Dr. John Powell speak. This is a lot of his work. He is at the Haas Institute, and he really talks about our worldview being about a worldview where all belong, and where we really means we the people, all of us, all the people. And he gets at talking about the problem of othering, whether it's othering people based on race or on income or gender or many other things, and really articulates that we're at a moment in our time where we have a deeply divided country and why that is, and some of the solutions that we as community action agencies and our partners could perhaps lift up, and some narratives that we could put forward that would build more empathy, more inclusiveness, more belonging, and perhaps hopefully reduce the fear and the anger and othering that's going on. So how do we bring those ideas to our whole family approach in our design, in changes we're making in the agency, and in our communities? That's really what this building block is asking you to think about. There are a number of other really good resources here. And, you know, again, you'll see that in some of these spaces we have, you know, 4, 5, 6 or more resources. So you really got to have a strategy maybe for, you know, which building block to start with and how to divide up some of that learning among your team. I'm emphasizing that because I want you to have the benefit of all these great resources, but you're going to have a strategy for reviewing them. All right. And so building block 6, building and using leadership, really, really important. Connecting a whole family approach to your agency's mission. It's important that leaders in your agency spend time doing that. Establishing a shared vision. I am a big believer that if we don't have a shared vision and it's not our shared vision and our purpose is not clearly articulated, that we're not going to be able to do a lot of this work that we've been talking about. It gets hard. There are going to be tough times, and when the going gets tough, the way that you'll be able to work through those is if everybody has a shared vision and are pointed at the same North Star. If we just think we're integrating for integration's sake or because somebody told us integration or whole family was important, that won't get us to the finish line. It won't get us to radically increasing impact for our families. So we have to really make sure that leadership is behind this, and everybody, leadership and everybody up and down and across the organization understands, you know, where we're going and why we're going. So that means strategic planning is really important. Program design is really important, and we're going to be releasing some program design tools a little bit later in the year that will help you walk through these and many other areas that are important to you know, getting on the same page together. And then just leadership needs to create the capacity for agency change, and I'm going to talk more about that next in the building block, but that's a lot about learning and training and that kind of thing. The tools, and this sort of goes, if you think about beyond the community action agency, shared vision, shared purpose, shared measures with your partners, with your collaborators in the community are all just as important as having that in the agency. So in this area, we really want folks to think about the community action agency being the catalyst to bringing people together and improving conditions for parents and children. If we're really going to break the cycle of poverty, if we're really going to end intergenerational poverty, we have to be engaged deeply with others and have a shared purpose and a shared goal. And really, in the end, that's what all of this is about, is bigger, exponentially greater impact than we've ever had before. So how do we get to that? So resources in this space that you might consider. So this is a lot about change and leadership, and I'm a big fan of John Kotter's work. He was at Harvard for many years and has sort of an 8-step plan for how you create change, and that involves having a guiding coalition. You've got to have a team, whether it's in your agency or your agency and your partners. You've got to have a vision. You've got to have a shared vision and clarity on that vision. People have to be committed to a bigger purpose and measurement and then those kind of things. So in this space, we're directing you to do some review of John Kotter. There's a lot of books out there, but here's 2 links to some shorter articles that folks could read. And then the collective impact work. And we have a partnership. The partnership has a partnership with FSG, who's a kind of a leader in training and technical assistance on collective impact. They have done several webinars for the partnership, and those are posted on the website, the partnership's website. You have these links, and I think there's maybe 1 or 2 more coming up that you can dial into. So we think those are some good resources, and we'll be working on this more for you in the coming months. Okay, building block 7, attending to organizational culture. And when people talk about their challenges for moving to a whole family approach, it's usually a lot of the things in this building block that they raise: staff buy-in, staff training. You know, let's look at some of these things. Communication, or restructuring, you know, all of these different issues that really go to your culture or your systems. And these are really important if you're truly going to shift your practice to a whole family approach. But I would contend that many of the things that we've already talked about, engaging with your customers and co-designing with them, having a shared purpose, having clear leadership and vision, that if you do all of those things, a lot of these organizational issues become easier. When you don't engage customers and when leadership hasn't articulated a purpose, then training and asking staff to do things differently becomes really hard, right? Because people don't have a clear understanding of, you know, well, what direction are we going and why are we going in that direction? So there are many things that we need to attend to in organizational culture, but they can get a lot easier if we've done some of the other work in the other building blocks. And certainly, you know, here's a whole other slide with some of these organizational culture issues: staff turnover, really creating a culture of continuous improvement and learning. If we're really going to get to that North Star, if we're really going to exponentially increase impact for our families, then we're going to have to be a learning culture. We're going to have to know how to use data, analyze it. We're going to have to understand security and confidentiality issues so we can share data. So there's a lot in this area for sure. And agencies that are on this journey have raised all these issues, and so that's sort of why we've packed so many things into this particular building block. And then in many ways, you have similar issues with your partners. You know, you have to have shared purpose with your partners and a communication structure and support for maintaining the partnership. So some of those same organizational issues that you have inside may translate over to the partnership. So here's the start of some resources that we have. So Annie Casey has done a brief on integrating data. So data is a part of this building block, so we've got that there. We've got some good research, anti-poverty series that the partnership has done that has some case studies on CAPS Tulsa and Garrett County that have been on the whole family journey for many years. There's an anti-poverty practice series on trauma-informed care, which is, you know, one way to prepare your staff to have the skills that they need to do this work. We've also got several good resources here on continuous quality improvement. So these last 2 resources, I would direct your attention really are very good, very comprehensive examples of continuous quality improvement ideas. And although they may sort of focus on early childhood and Head Start, they apply across the board in many ways. So I would really encourage you to take a look at those resources. And then there's some webinars that we've done in the data learning community that we have underway now, and there are probably more of those on the website, but I just selected a few that might be of interest to you. So then finally, building block 8, securing funding and other resources. Obviously, this is really an important building block. We've got to have the resources and money to do this. We certainly want people to think about this as not just money, but there are a lot of other ways to get to think about resources, realigning your work that is currently funded in the agency, building braiding and blending services in new ways can sometimes tap into resources you didn't realize. Beyond the Community Action Agency, engaging partners. There may not be a resource you have to do something, so is a partner operating in that space, and can you join together and bring those services to the families? And then, of course, sort of thinking about clear plans and memos of understanding and having those in place. So there's a lot more that we could talk about with funding, but we are going to direct you at this point right now to Advancing Two-Generation Funding to Help Families Succeed, which is a brief that the Casey Foundation has put out on blending and braiding funding. And in the months to come, we'll add some resources to this space and go deeper on this particular building block. So that's all the building block, and I just want to give a disclaimer that, the categories, the ideas that we surface in each of these building blocks are not inclusive. There may be different aspects that we didn't include. We've tried to include the ones we think community action agencies bring up and need to attend to the most, but we certainly think that there are other things in each of these areas that you may want to consider. If you have a thought about, some area that you think is missing in one of these building blocks that you're noodling around on, please email that to me or, give us a chat. Send something in the chat here in the couple of minutes that we have remaining. So with that, I'm just going to pause for a minute. I know we just have a minute or two left. We jam-packed a lot into this Building Blocks webinar. Does anybody have any reaction or question or comment about the building blocks that you would like to type into the chat? The chat's over there on the right in the Q&A, and you can select everyone or all. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions there, so I'll give that a minute more. While perhaps you take a minute to type in your chat, I will highlight for you some future webinar Wednesdays that are coming up. On September 12th, we have an Opportunity Youth in Two-Gen Practice webinar that will focus on young people and two-generation practice. On September 19th, we're doing a Building Wealth Across Generations webinar. And then on September 26th, I mentioned that Collective Impact series that the partnership has been doing. That will continue on the 26th with Community Engagement and Equity for Collective Impact. So you could perhaps touch on several building blocks if you dial into that webinar. Okay, any final opportunity? It's straight up 3 o'clock, I think, so we're probably ending on time. I hope this was helpful to all of you. If you have any questions, please send those to us at the partnership. I'm happy to get an email too. My email is chaffin.jeannie, Jeannie, @gmail.com. You can email me too if you have questions. And we'll get this webinar and recording up on the partnership website so you can start accessing these resources right away. So thank you and good luck on your whole family approach journey. Bye-bye.